Give us one more honeypot.
Yeah, you promised us two.
That's right. So that was the old school, sensational, totally crazy honeypot story. But the one that I found through research in my book was talking to a scholar who I realized had been dealing with these undercover China Reform Forum MSS officers. And he was quite young at the time. He had some, government experience, but was a scholar and was engaging with China Reform Forum, was getting invited to China to attend conferences, and over a couple of years really built up a close relationship with some of these undercover MSS officers. And they would take him out for drinks. They would, bring him over, take him to banquets. And one time they invited him over for a conference. And then when he got there was no conference. And these MSS guys are like, oh, we'll just take you around anyway. So they took him to a fashion show of, as he described it, scantily clad Uyghur women. And then as the show was going on, one of these MSS guys leaned over and was like, oh, it's pretty good, right? Would you like to go upstairs with them? And, he turned it down. But then the next step in the kind of junket was they took him to a spa, and he called it like an underground water grotto spa where you have these like rock formations and a heated pool and you can kind of hide in the rocks. And so he was just chilling there with these undercover MSS officers. And at one point, a guy walks through who he interpreted as their boss. Like they all waved at him. He was introduced to this guy, and the MSS boss was like, "Yeah, have a good time, enjoy your stay at our sauna." And then after the spa, they all got massages, and then the woman basically offered him something more than a massage as he was on the table, which he turned down,
like a sandwich,
a kind of sandwich, yeah. And
you one-upped me. Well done.
He turned that down, but they tried all sorts of things. So he'd go to different provinces in China, and he'd have different parts of the MSS running the same operations against him. At one point, he met with these China Reform Forum MSS guys, and they went to hand him a reimbursement for all his travel expenses, and they did it in a deliberately dodgy way, apparently, where they met in a cafe sitting by the window so people from the street could see. So it's probably someone taking photos. And this MSS guy got an envelope full of cash and kind of tried to hand it to him under the table. Not just, oh, here, this is your reimbursement, this is a legitimate exchange of cash, but trying to make it look like something dodgy so that they could probably use that against him at a later stage. And at the same time, they would try to give him this spiel that China was becoming democratic, that and at the same time, it'd be really good if you went back and got a job in the US government, and that we could keep talking to you after that. But at no point, in these years of friendship with him, did they ever actually drop cover and say, we're MSS officers. They really believed in this pretense of being scholars who, will invite you over for conferences, but also like having a good time.
So I want to get your take on something that happened this past week. In Hong Kong, a bunch of bankers from around the world, including the head of UBS, had this financial forum, and they were very excited about this prospect of China opening back up after COVID, and the idea that it's time to go back to investing in China. After reading your book, I kind of have a little different take on this sort of thing. But what do you think is going on there?
I mean, people who are financially invested in China have so many incentives to be, in a way, optimistic about the country and to sell its story to the rest of the world. And the Chinese Communist Party recognizes that. I mean, there are a lot of people in the investment community, a lot of economists who have changed their minds, or who recognize that the potential benefits of investment and trade with China from years past are sort of not quite there anymore, and come with a lot more risks of disruption, of sanctions from the US government, for example. But this is just an example, I think, to me, of how China still has a lot of interest groups and communities where it can run these influence efforts that are more inclined to go overseas and push China's agenda. And while people in Congress, I think, are largely waking up and recognize where China is now, you still have a lot of people in that community. You still have a lot of pro-CCP Chinese community figures. You'll still have a lot of people in local governments and a lot of countries like in Africa and Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands that are still sold on China's message, essentially, are still trying to accrue these sorts of benefits from China. And China's still got a lot of room to push influence in those areas.
Well, I think before we wrap up for the day, it might be worth giving just a little more of a spotlight on the 12th Bureau, since that was such a focus of the book. Like, what are they versus the other bureaus of the MSS? Just kind of like how it all operates.
It's really, I think, the most fascinating part of the MSS. Its name is something like the Social Liaison Bureau or Social Investigation Bureau. And I think that naming really kind of points to the way that it focuses on social relationships, on building these cultural front organizations to engage with people, setting up scholarly ventures, pretending to be journalists and media organizations and entrepreneurs. So kind of trying to use social networks in China as a tool for intelligence and influence operations. And a lot of people kind of view it as an elite part of the MSS that gets some of the best talent and historically has run some of the most effective and ambitious, but I think also quite cautious and patient operations around the world. So there's the case of Katrina Leung, which is another kind of honeypot story. This FBI source who was actually working for the MSS and in the process seduced two of her FBI handlers, and she was handled by the 12th Bureau of the MSS. And it's the 12th Bureau that was behind China Reform Forum, this idea of China's peaceful rise. And it's really just a fascinating part of the MSS to study. I think it's something that seemed to really frustrate the former counterintelligence officers I interviewed, but it was great as a scholar to actually look at what they were doing, because there are so many interesting characters involved. You had a whole bunch of poets, musicians, think tankers, foreign policy scholars actually joined the 12th Bureau as MSS officers. They were recruiting a really kind of eclectic mix of people because of this focus on social exchanges, cultural exchanges, and using that as a weapon for covert operations.
Yeah, it's amazing the different types of people that they got to get involved.
I mean, if you're a poet, how else are you going to make money?
I mean, you know it.
Yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of people in the MSS who are great poets, who are great calligraphers, who are great, readers of classical Chinese literature, and those people seem to really appear, especially in the 12th Bureau, and sort of to this point of like the weird and eclectic networks that they were building. I don't know if you ever heard the music of Richard Clayderman in China.
I've heard. My mom loved this song, "Ballad for Adeline" or something, which is a Richard Clayderman song.
Yeah, he's like one of the biggest, musicians or artists in China. He's this French pianist who basically writes like elevator music or plays elevator music, really sappy, soft pop, romantic piano. I think in China they call him the Prince of Romantic Piano. And what I found was that his tours of China and his career in China was built up by the MSS 12th Bureau. I don't know exactly why they were doing this. I couldn't get in touch with Richard Clayderman, unfortunately. But maybe it was just a way to send people to France, to an excuse to send officers on these trips abroad. But it's a really creative and fun part of the MSS to study, and also really a really dangerous and effective part.
It's like you said, it's a symphony. It's really beautiful.
Maybe they really liked his music. I mean, there's a high tolerance for elevator music in China. Look at how much they love Kenny G.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Closing Time, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I don't think that's the name of the song.
No.
I think that's another song.
Oh,
But
You've also got
yeah.
Julio Iglesias, the Spanish singer. He was the first foreign singer, I think, to give like a live performance on CCTV. And again, it was organized by the MSS 12th Bureau. So
really?
Gosh.
maybe, I mean, it's kind of absurd. Maybe it was just a way of kind of shoring up their cover and really living this pretense of being a cultural organization. But it makes for fun reading and a fun object of study.
Now I'm kind of wondering if like the MSS is responsible for Kenny G's career.
Who knows?
Maybe.
Who knows?
All right. Well, I mean, like, it's just staggering the level of the Communist Party's influence operations and just like how smart they are about it. And it's great that you've been able to expose so much of this in your book. Definitely recommend it to anyone watching. There's just, I mean, you sample just a bit of it. And yeah, this is an important message for people to understand.
What do you think the West can do about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what really matters. Right now, it's just so poorly understood. A lot of people, I think, don't quite take these activities seriously enough. Countries need to get laws to actually criminalize some of these activities, not to criminalize just like talking to an MSS officer, but to better go against the MSS officers and the people who are wittingly engaged in these activities, and create the political backing to go after this, because you can't stop political influence operations if you're not willing to accept that essentially people on your side politically are probably going to get burnt by this. That's the process that Australia had to go through, and that's what makes it such a difficult challenge in many countries when they're not willing to really go all the way, and they might make some motions of wanting to deal with political influence, but aren't actually seriously tackling the problem. So I think, across the Five Eyes, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, there's still a lot more to be done by governments. But a lot of it should also be public. You can't fight influence work in the dark. It thrives behind closed doors when people can make deals that aren't being scrutinized by the public, when people don't have to come to terms with the fact that they're engaging with and getting access from MSS officers. So governments need to be making it public, but it's not something that only governments can do. This book that I've written is entirely essentially based on open sources that I've read, in Chinese, in English. I've spent a lot of time in libraries looking at Chinese business records and that sort of thing. And this is something that people can keep doing and should keep doing to shine a light on influence activities, shine a light on these covert organizations, and through that, I think, impose costs on their activities and also on kind of reckless engagement with them.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for writing the book.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, and hope everyone listening enjoys the book too. Or
gets terrified by it, one of those.
Why not both?
It's a smorgasbord of emotion. You can say, you can put that on the back of your book, a smorgasbord of emotions, Chris Chappell, China Uncensored.
Yep, it'll be on the second edition.
Excellent. Excellent. It's really amazing how these, Chinese spies can, pretend to be your friend for years and years without ever breaking. Like, how would you know that maybe one of the people closest to you might be your enemy? I mean, I'm not saying anything about you, Shelley, because I know you're my enemy.
Okay.
And I think we're all pretty aware how you feel about Matt.
Well, I mean, that's why the book's called Spies and Lies, right? Because the spies are actually lying to you.
Yeah. So maybe I'm lying about how I feel about Matt.
And do you actually like him?
I don't know where the impression is that I don't like Matt came from.
The comment section.
Yeah, or the last 180 podcasts.
There might be some clues. Oh, and I just want to say, Matt, at one point in this podcast, you had this very emotional, we all just want to be told we're qualified. And I just got to say, Matt, you are qualified to be my friend.
Thanks, Chris.
Is there anything you'd like to say to me?
Nope.
Thanks for watching China Unscripted.